Good morning, or good afternoon, rather, everybody. It may be morning if you're dialing in from another time zone. Um, my name is Bruce Beckwith. I'm Director of Program Development for Mentor New York, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. Thank you all for attending today. Uh, we have a lot of people registered. They will continue to join in. We have a little over 30% already logged on. A couple of pointers before we actually begin the webinar. You will need paper and pen or pencil. So if you don't have a couple of sheets of paper and something to write with handy, if you could go get something right now, we'll give you a few seconds to go grab something from your desk or from the other room. We have a lot of material to cover today. Um, I am going to try to keep this as informal as I possibly can. I do have a notes prepared because I like to make sure that I cover all the information that I think is essential for people to know. And we also want to leave space for people to ask questions later on in the webinar. We will have an opportunity for people to either put into the chat box, or we're going to unmute everybody's mic so you can actually speak to me and we can talk about the content of today's presentation. One thing I want to explain before we move on. There are a lot of letters which represent a lot of labels associated with the LGBTQ community. Besides there being LGBTQ and a second Q, there is an A for asexual, an I for intersex, and sometimes you may see the number 2 and the letter S for two-spirited. It is a mouthful. It is because we don't want to leave anybody behind, and we want everybody in the community represented the way they self-identify. But for the purposes of a presentation like this, I will probably be using abbreviated versions of these letters. So this is not to think that I'm leaving anybody out or discounting any group. So why don't we get started? As I said, my name is Bruce Beckwith, and I'm Director of Program Development for Mentor New York. Mentor New York is the infrastructure of mentoring for the state of New York. We do webinars like this right now, 1 or 2 of them a week. Once the webinar has been completed, it is being recorded. You will be able to, besides a copy of the deck being sent to you in a follow-up email, you will be able to actually access the webinar to run through it again with all my commentary on our website in a couple of days, along with all of the attachments and handouts. You'll see there are 2 handouts just below that in the box on the right. You will see 2 handouts. One is a definition of terms, another one is a questionnaire. You can just ignore those for right now. We'll get to those in a little bit. So if everybody is ready, why don't we move to the next slide and talk about actually what we're going to talk about today. So in this workshop, we're going to cover why mentoring is important and what makes mentoring actually work. We will talk about what you may or may not know about sexual expression and gender identity. And we will discuss ideas to make programs more overtly inclusive. And we're going to wrap up, as I said earlier, with a Q&A at the end. Okay, moving on. So here's what I have to start with. I want you to use the chat box, and I have some questions I'm going to ask you. The first question is, who was your best friend when you were growing up? Who was your best friend? And if you can think of one thing that you remember about that relationship, what that one thing might be. If you would use the chat box and just write your responses in there, and I'll give you 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and then we'll see what kind of answers we got. Okay, so who was your best friend when you were growing up, and what do you remember about that relationship? Andrew, you have access to the chat box. What are some of the responses that are coming through?
So somebody said that they had a friend named Heather, and they remember the feeling of togetherness when they were with them. Somebody else said they had a friend named Elizabeth, and they used to talk on the phone and play Webkins together every weekend. Somebody had a friend named Amanda. She was kind and always made her feel special. Somebody else had a neighbor that liked to play outside games. Somebody had a friend named Ramona that would race and compete with one another. Somebody had a friend named Quinn who had a garage band together. And they always were really supportive of each other, and they didn't care what other people thought. Somebody had a friend named Michael. They were best friends because they lived close by and they both liked comic books and sleeping in tents. Somebody had a best friend from grade school who liked similar activities. Somebody remembers their friend LaShawn, that they had a lot of trust together. Somebody had a friend named Don. They remember playing outside with them a lot. There's another best friend that lived in the neighborhood and shared similar values. They were caring, supportive, and enjoyed playing together.
Great, great. These are great. I love hearing this. I especially love hearing about comic books and uh, uh, overnights in tents. That sounds like when I was in elementary school. Uh, Before we go on to the next question, though, I neglected to introduce you to my co-facilitator today. Andrew, would you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, everyone. My name's Andrew. I'm an AmeriCorps Vista working with Mentor New York this year. Thank you all for coming, and yeah, I'm just here to help Bruce out. Um, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar.
Okay, thanks so much, Andrew, and thank you for all your help. I really appreciate it. Our age difference between Andrew and myself is why I'm perfectly fine with talking through these webinars and setting up the content, but he is way better at the technology. So thank you again for being here and supporting me with this. Let's go on to the next question, okay? We have another question. Okay, what's your favorite love story, whether it was a book or a movie, and why is it your favorite story? Again, using the chat book, tell us what your favorite love story was and why it's your favorite love story. Okay, Andrew, are we getting some responses?
Yeah, I'll start reading through them for you.
Great.
The first one, they said the movie Princess Bride. Their reason for this was because he always said,
Great
"As you
movie.
wish." Um, the Notebook, somebody said because it interprets a different force of love. Another person said The Notebook because it shows unconditional love and commitment. Somebody else said my favorite love story was from A Walk to Remember. It just shows how a person can be changed through love and affection. Somebody said the book The Wedding slash Safe Haven by Nicholas Sparks. Somebody said their parents were their favorite love story. They said if my mom had not met my dad when she did, she was moving back home to her native country and my family would not have started. Somebody else said the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. They said I just love the idea of an intense anger and love being complicated and mixed up, having to navigate emotions. Another person said my parents as well, because they demonstrated what love looks like between two people. Somebody said the movie Save the Last Dance. Another person said the movie The Notebook, um, because the
Wow.
husband is telling the wife their story to help her remember their life together. And then somebody said Tony and Maria in West Side Story, they were in love despite the adversity in their culture and neighborhood at that time.
Okay, I like these are all great answers, and I like the idea that someone identified a love in the face of adversity. That's great. Okay, so last question. You didn't know you're going to have to write so much today. Last question. When you were a teenager, who was your go-to person, and what was it about that person that made you feel you could trust them? So who was your go-to person and why did you trust them? What was it? What characteristic or quality was it about them that made them worthy of your trust? Okay, Andrew, are we getting some responses?
Yep. So somebody said the woman that they babysat for, and it was because nothing phased her. Somebody else said there was no one person, it was a circle of friends, and they developed trust. Somebody else said that their mom was their go-to person. She was very supportive and understanding. We could talk about anything on the same level, like we were both adults. Somebody else said that it was their best friend. She made sure to listen to her, and she never shared her problems or secrets to anyone else. Um, Somebody said my stepmom because she was open-minded and supportive. The one person said my best friend. I had known her throughout school and we spent much of our time together. She felt like more of a sister. Another person said my mom because she never judged me and always allowed me to be myself. Somebody said their friend Kelly because she and her family were open to me during a time of struggle in my life. Another person said my high school career counselor, Miss Lyons. She was a great listener and never judged me no matter what I did. If I was in a tough spot, she helped me. Instead of reprimanding me, she believed in me when no one else did. Somebody said my uncle, he was always available to talk and he was never judgmental about anything. Another person said my uncle as well. Somebody said my best friend Edith, she did not judge me. She's compassionate, caring, and did not respond to my mistakes in a judgmental way. Somebody else said that their friend, since they shared common values and their moms were friends. Somebody else said that their high school basketball coach was their go-to person. She was accepting of everyone and she was very understanding. She was always there for everyone. Somebody else said that their uncle was very open and understanding as well.
Okay, this is great, and I love getting all these responses, especially so many important words coming up. Non-judgmental, open-minded, good listener, confidant, understanding, trustworthy, supportive, um, unfazable. Uh, 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 you also, a couple of people described someone who didn't necessarily have all the answers, but was like a thinking partner for them. These are really great answers, and I would venture to guess that everybody would like to have someone they could think of as their best friend that had the qualities that were trustworthy and supportive, and someone that you shared secrets with. Um, Everybody wants a love story that uh, 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 is unconditional, and everybody wants a friend or a confidant that has all those qualities that we just listed, that we're understanding and good listener and open-minded and trustworthy and non-judgmental and supportive. So let's move on and let's talk a little bit about some facts about mentoring. So why mentoring? What is the value in mentoring? Mentoring assures young people that there is someone who cares about them, that they are not alone in dealing with challenges, and makes them feel like they matter. Ultimately, mentoring connects young people to personal growth, development, and social and economic opportunity. Yet, 1 in 3 young people in this country will grow up without this particular critical asset, meaning not having a go-to person in their life. Okay, let's talk about, okay, this is called the gender unicorn. Okay, actually, it's an updated version of something you may have seen before if you've had any kind of previous background in LGBTQ definitions. It used to be referred to as the genderbread person. It is no longer. We now use the unicorn. It is considered even more neutral than a genderbread person. So this basically helps you understand gender identity and sexual orientation. So, biological sex refers to the objectively measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes. In a female, that would be vagina, ovaries, 2X chromosomes. In the male, that would be a penis, testes, and an X and a Y chromosome. And in someone who's intersex, there would be some combination of both. Sexual orientation is who you are physically, spiritually, and emotionally attracted to based on their sex or gender in relationship to your own. Gender identity is how you, in your head, think of yourself. It's the chemistry that composes you, e.g., hormonal levels, how you interpret that and what that means. There is a handout of definitions that is much more extensive, that goes into a whole list of definitions and labels. It's attached right here on the handouts. I'm not going to read through them because it's quite long, but it's there for you to help you at some point if you want to open it up and look at it. So we're going to take a quick little quiz, but there's a caveat to this quiz. This quiz is actually only for the participants who self-identify as heterosexual. Okay, I'm not trying to, everybody else, sit tight. There is a method to my madness. But if we could go on to the next slide. Okay. And you can, right, there we go. There's the face we all love. Okay, so if you could pop open if you want to, I will read the questions as well. But if you could pop open the questionnaire, take a piece of paper and answer the following 10 or 12 questions. The first question is, what do you think caused your heterosexuality? Question number 2, when and how did you first decide that you were a heterosexual? Number 3, is it possible that your heterosexuality is just a phase that you may grow out of? Is it possible that your heterosexuality stems from a fear of others of the same sex? Number 5, assuming you have never slept with a member of your own sex, is it possible that you might be gay if you tried it? Number 6, if heterosexuality is normal, why are so many mental health patients heterosexuals? Number 7, why do heterosexual people try to seduce others into their lifestyle? Number 8, Do you flaunt your heterosexuality? Can you just be who you are and keep it quiet and keep it to yourself? Number 9 is based on a government statistic. The great majority of pedophiles, almost 99% of them, are heterosexual. Therefore, do you consider it safe to expose your children to heterosexual teachers? We're going to skip number 10 for today. I am going to ask you why you think heterosexual people are so promiscuous. So many of them are promiscuous. And finally, would you want your child to be a heterosexual, knowing the problems they would face, such as heartbreak, disease, and divorce? Okay, I'll give you a few seconds just to finish if you're actually filling in the form. So now, using the chat box, if you would, why do you think I asked you to complete this questionnaire? What do you think was the point behind completing this questionnaire? Okay, Andrew, are we getting some responses?
Yes, we are.
Great.
So somebody said that these are questions LGBTQ folks get asked about their identity. Somebody else said that it asks us to interrogate straightness the way we interrogate LGBTQ people. All ignorant questions that people only ask LGBTQ people because they assume that straight is the default. LGBTQ people are questioned in the same way by heteros, but it's usually derogatory. These are oftentimes the questions asked of the LGBTQ community. Somebody else said to show how uncomfortable it is to be asked about your sexual orientation.
Okay, so we have got a really savvy group of people online, and I'm so glad I'm more transparent than I thought I was going to be. That's terrific. This is exactly on point. Everything that everybody said is absolutely true. And you don't have to answer this question, but I'm just going to throw it out. Was anybody at any point insulted by any of the questions I was asking them? Because if you were, you should be. Um, uh, uh, Gay people get asked these questions all the time, and it's supposed to just roll off their backs like water off a duck's back, and they're not supposed to pay attention, or they're supposed to understand that everybody is learning, so to speak. But I always find it very interesting that I never hear a gay person say, I had to learn about what it was like to be straight so I knew how to act with my straight friends. So now you get it and you see how sensitive this issue is, especially imagine if you're an adolescent and you're just questioning your either your gender identity or your sexual orientation. So Let's move on to the next slide. Thank you all for those for your really frank answers. Those were really, really great, and I really appreciate it. It really helps a lot. So, using another piece of paper, I want you to take a piece of paper that I asked you to get earlier, and something to write with. Okay. I want you to think of a secret that no one or just very few people, if any, know about you. A secret, something that's very important to you, but something that almost nobody, maybe possibly no one actually does know about you. And I want you to write that secret down on that piece of paper. And when you finish writing it down, I want you to fold the piece of paper in half, and I want you to move it away from where you are for a minute. Just push it aside, or push it in front of you, or over to the left or the right or somewhere, but make sure it's where you know it is. You don't lose it. Okay. Um, so everybody's written their secret down. They folded the piece of paper over and they've pushed it aside, either to the left or the right of them or in front of them, so that it's where they know it is, but it's not close to them right now. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you very much. So let's get into some facts, because I think it's important for everybody to actually know what the statistics are. Now, these statistics were correct as of about 2.5 months ago. All right. It's estimated that at least 3.2 million young people actually identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, two-spirited, or intersexed. And that's who identify. That's not who may not self-identify. It doesn't mean that there aren't more people. Nearly 3/4 of queer identified students are bullied. More than half do not feel safe in their schools or even in their community. And more than 1/4 of LGBTQ identified young people reported being punished for kissing and or holding hands in public. It's not uncommon for LGBTQ youth to run away out of fear of being hurt or being thrown out of their homes after they've disclosed. Many gay and transgender youth end up in detention. 300,000 a year. And just over 6% of heterosexual youth attempt suicide, as opposed to 28% of gay and lesbian youth. Therefore, it's not surprising that the mentoring experience is a natural fit into the needs of sexual minority youth. Providing an adult friend who is a supportive advisor, non-judgmental, a good listener, who can open doors to new ways of seeing themselves. As you can see, 42% of queer youth say that their community they live in is not accepting of people like themselves. that they are twice as likely as their peers to say that they've actually been physically assaulted, kicked, and or shoved. And 26% say that the biggest problems are the issue of rejection and bullying. Mentors encourage mentees to expand their scope of knowledge and experience. They can light the way to a future so they can see themselves and their future more clearly. Okay, so the second Q, which I get asked about a lot, the second Q is for questioning. Not every young person understands how they feel and can be left feeling lost and not belonging by a culture that constantly tries to categorize, pigeonhole, and label people. And we know this, I think this is more important than ever, that young people uh, feel like they are somewhere on a spectrum in everything, and they don't want to be categorized or necessarily labeled. So just to make things a little bit more complicated, consider the intersectionality of culture, gender, and sexuality, such as a lesbian Latinx, or a gay Afro-Caribbean, or transgender Filipino American. What separates LGBTQ youth from other minority youth is the intersectionality of their identities. Depending on where you live, the intersectionality of your minority status might bring added challenges and dangers. If mentors are struggling to understand a mentee's experience, they need to challenge themselves to learn more about that experience. So this really brings in the issue of diversity and multiculturalism and some diversity training, which we assume that our programs do when they do mentor training, but incorporating the idea that when you are gay, transgender, lesbian, bisexual, intersex, that you have an added label to whatever other cultural labels are you carry with you. Okay, how can programs help? Are LGBT people included in your organization's diversity plan? Is your program's design and management plan based on the heterosexual normative standard? Have you explored ways to incorporate LGBTQ positive material into your policies and guidelines, as well as training and supervision protocols? Are there guidelines in place if a mentee should come out to their mentor? I think these are all things that all programs, if they haven't already, you may have thought about them and talked about them, but what actual steps have you taken to concretize these ideas? Social interaction anxiety creates more barriers to getting support. The experience of rejection and or witnessing rejection, ridicule of others, can create a fear of initiating and maintaining social conversations and interactions. This in turn creates a barrier to receiving support that might otherwise be available. When young people feel rejected, rebuffed by authority figures or their peers, they are less likely to ask for assistance, fearing further rejection and ridicule. This creates a vicious cycle of needed assistance and being conditioned not to ask for it. Mentors can act as a resource, helping mentees find answers to questions about themselves. Mentors can help mentees identify adult allies they can turn to when they're having difficulties. So, what about those pieces of paper I asked you to fold and put aside a couple minutes ago? This is the secret I asked you to think about. What did you think I was going to have you do with this? Did you think I would ask people to type their secrets into the chat box? What feelings come up for you when you think you might be asked to share this secret? How do you think LGBTQ youth feel when they start to question their own gender or sexual identity or orientation? What do you think it might feel like to hold on to a secret like this? So why don't you use the chat box and tell me either what feelings came up for you after you put the secret aside and then I drew your attention back to it, and or how that might relate to um, queer youth and their experience of possibly holding on to a secret. I'll give you a minute, and why don't you put some responses in the chat box? I'd really like to hear how people experience this. Andrew, are there any responses coming through?
Yeah.
Great.
Somebody said they felt guarded. Um, somebody else said that it's like it's not safe to share LGBT identities with strangers. It's not a secret that they would reveal in a chat box. Somebody said it made them feel unfulfilled. Um, somebody said one could feel embarrassed, shameful, and afraid. It looks like those are all of them. Oh, another one just came in. Somebody said felt like restraining in the brain um, of worry.
So these are all really important experiences, and thank you all for your responses and for being so candid. Um, I have a feeling that a lot of people on the call share a lot of similar emotional experiences as this. Um, you know, we often say that one of the keys to being a good mentor is your ability to be able to empathize with our young people's experience. But the truth is, if we really think about it, we can actually sympathize with their experience without actually having to identify with who are the way our mentees identify, because we know what it feels like to be guarded and to not feel safe and to maybe not feel fulfilled, like your whole complete self can't be represented in all places. Um, to feel possibly ashamed or afraid, um, embarrassed, restrained. Those are all human experiences that we have. It may not be directly related to our sexuality or our gender identity, but we know what those feelings feel like. So we can both empathize and hopefully sympathize with our mentees when they may be having this experience. So what helps? Having a strong family relationship is good for mental health. It's important for adult allies to know how they can help young people. Some young people will have well-informed, supportive families. This is a best case scenario, but this is not every young person's reality or experience. Encouraging young people to come out may not always be the best thing. Before disclosing, young people should consider, reflect on their parents' values. What have you heard them say about gay people? Explore best case scenarios and worst case scenarios with them. This is something that mentors can do. And very important, have a backup plan. Put supports in place for yourself. I can't emphasize enough that coming out is not always the best thing for an adolescent to do. That some young people need to wait till they get to college, or at least until they move out of away from their families before they publicly come out, because for where they live and who the community is that they live in, it may be the safest thing for them to do. And I put young people's safety ahead of anything else. So let's not encourage them necessarily. Let's just be a thinking partner and help them with the process. We're going to be sending you a kind of a do's and don'ts to consider, along with resources in a one-pager that's going to be in the follow-up email that you're going to get. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. So let's talk about diversity and inclusion. I love this quote. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Diversity is essential, but inclusion is different than diversity. Inclusion is taking diversity one step further in practice by creating an environment that's welcoming, participatory, and values the voices of all. Include young people's voices. In youth work, inclusion means that all young people are recognized as having inherent worth and dignity. It also means identifying, understanding, and actively removing barriers that exist for certain groups of young people in our society. Include the voices of youth. Write down policy. Be intentional and train your staff. While there have certainly been efforts to create a more equitable world for us to live in, the truth remains that unless that we are actively working towards inclusion, we are perpetuating a system of exclusion and inequality. So let's talk about creating an inclusive environment. That involves your policy statements. Do you have a statement of inclusion for your program? What kinds of questions do you have on your intake forms? Are your program guidelines and policies inclusive for all youth? Would all youth feel welcome and accepted in your program? And how would young people know your mentoring program is a safe place for them to be themselves? It's a really important question, I think, for all programs to ask themselves. So here's some actual suggestions. So for a policy statement, it might say our program welcomes all youth, regardless of religious belief, background, gender identity, sexual orientation, and whatever else you think is important to include in that. Your statement of inclusion might sound like this. We aim to create a space that is free of discrimination, where everyone feels comfortable being themselves and participating fully without fear of being teased, attacked, or excluded. And in your intake questions, you might provide opportunities for young people to paint a picture of themselves that includes what whatever is important to them and their identity. Creating an inclusive climate. Display images of LGBT youth in your offices, including posters, brochures, books, etc. Display safe space signs and respect agreements. Consciously promote your program to organizations that serve LGBTQQ youth as well as potential volunteers. And be prepared to respond to questions from parents and guardians about being inclusive of LGBTQ youth. These are just some ideas to consider. And remember, when we talk about inclusion, we're even though I'm putting an emphasis on the youth in our programs, um, this also refers to your volunteer recruitment efforts as well. So let's recap everything we've talked about. Mentors support young people, whoever they are and wherever they are in their development and self-discovery. Students who identify as something other than heterosexual and/or cisgendered are at greater risk of harassment, homelessness, and suicide. Establishing thoughtful, inclusive policies is critical to creating a safe space for all mentees and mentors. So I hope this information has been helpful. Um, uh, if it stimulates more questions, that's great. I would love to hear from all of you right now. If we could actually unmute everybody, and then once Andrew unmutes all of you, if you click on the little green microphone, well, it's probably red right now, but if you click on your microphone in the sidebar that's on the right of your screen, you'll actually be able to talk. You can either submit comments or questions in the chat box, or you can speak to me directly about anything that we've talked about today, how it relates to mentoring. I'm open to any and all questions. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and comments.
Right, yeah, so I just unmuted everybody. Like Bruce said, if you want to ask a question aloud, just make sure you hit your microphone button first, because you have to unmute yourself, but I unlocked it.
Right, so you have to switch it from red to green. Just click on it, it'll turn green, and I'll be able to hear you. And or you can submit something into the chat box, and Andrew will let me know what's coming through. Any thoughts or questions from anybody today?
Somebody asked what the goal of today's workshop was.
It was really informational and to stimulate the get people thinking about how inclusive their programs may or may not be. And I feel like a lot of people talk about it, but they may not necessarily have concretized making their programs inclusive by creating policy statements and statements of inclusion, or how people are represented, what questions they're asking on applications, etc. And that was really the purpose. And also to better inform people about how diverse this community is, because more and more young people are self-identifying somewhere on the spectrum. And I think that we want to be prepared and have a fuller understanding of each young person that comes to us as an individual. I hope that answered your question.
And
Hi, Bruce. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, Bruce. This is Francis. We met at the conference at LIU Brookville in March.
Oh,
I
great.
don't know if you might
Terrific,
remember me.
Francis. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? It's great to see you.
Great.
And thank you to you and Andrew for leading this presentation. And I feel this topic is becoming more and more important in mentoring and really just in the overall landscape with diversity and inclusion and how it's being applied within mentoring and every other outlet. So just my quick question is, and again, this sounds very like open-ended crystal ball like type question, but how much more important or like how I can't even phrase the best question, but like with the LGBT topic, with this becoming of like an even more more in discussion along with diversity inclusion, how do you foresee like mentoring that? I mean, this particular cohort. Do you see like in the foreseeable future that like mentoring the LGBT youth is going to be like, do you think it's going to be even greater than it is now? I
Okay,
mean,
so you're right. It is kind of a crystal ball question. Let me kind of answer it. I hope this doesn't sound too broad because there's a
right,
lot of facets to the question that you're answering and to this topic. Um,
sure.
there are a lot of, now so people have come at me with questions about this for the last 20 years that I've been in this
Oh,
business on
wow.
some form or fashion. Um,
Hmm.
uh, the questions sometimes are, should we be only matching LGBT self-identified volunteers with
Hmm.
those youth who self-identify with them? And I
Right.
don't have an answer to that question. I think it's on
Okay.
a program by program basis. We do have a
Sure.
philosophy, and that is you don't have to be living a young person's experience to be able to help them with that experience and be
Sure.
supportive of them. If as long as you're generous and open-minded and non-judgmental and so forth.
Hmm.
So it really depends on the program. We have some programs in this country, not here in New York City, but in this country that specialize in serving this population.
Mm.
Mentoring programs. There is one out in Los Angeles. There's a very well-established one called True Colors in Connecticut that
Hmm.
serves this population exclusively. Their mentors are both self-identify all over the place, not
Mm.
exclusively. But as you can imagine, this is the kind of a thing when if you're creating a program specifically to serve this population in this community, you're
Right.
going to attract people who self-identify because it makes sense. You want to look for people who have a vested interest in supporting youth that
Hmm.
they identify with. So
Okay.
there is that piece of it. But there's the other piece of it, and that is, are not all the youth in our programs know who they are or how they identify when they come into our programs. We have
Sure.
programs where young people start at 8, 9, 10 years old, and they're still in the program when they're 14 and 15. They've just gone through puberty right in front of
Hmm.
their mentors and possibly the beginning of some kind of gender identity awakening or sexual awakening. Some young
Hmm.
people will tell you that they knew when they were very young. Other people will tell you they didn't know really, or it didn't occur to them until they were 16, 17, 18 years old. Are
Hmm.
our mentors better prepared to be supportive and be understanding the
Yeah.
more we educate them? So I hope that answered your question in a way.
Yeah, no, it did, Bruce. It definitely did, especially the second part of that question you posed, because that's I mean, again, like as our world is continuing to grow and expand, so does right, like I mean, the youth and all the different experiences and decisions they go through, and right, how do we as mentors And also as like staffs, running mentor programs, how do we just continue to address that with both the mentors and the mentees, and also, with the families, et cetera. But also, right, how do we, show that, the diversity and inclusion where it all like kind of ties in overall, just making sure it is being well emphasized, and again, just keeping that communication open. Thank you, Bruce.
Absolutely. There's an expression or a philosophy that is used by people who do any kind of counseling, and that
Hmm.
is meeting the person where they're at. And that
Hmm.
is, if they self-identify, if they label themselves as one thing or another, we have to be ready to say, yes, that's true for you, even if that
Hmm.
label changes next week or next month. That's true for you. And we have to be prepared as adults who are caring, supportive adults to meet people where they're at. And I think that the more we know, the better we can do that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is definitely that's definitely a solid answer worth keeping in mind. Thank you again.
Okay. Anybody else, please? I'm happy. We have plenty of time. I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
Just really quick, I'm going to interject. I'm going to put this up on the screen. If you have a smartphone, if you take the camera app and put it up to the screen to this code, it'll take you right to our SurveyMonkey, and we'd appreciate your feedback on this webinar so we can continue to improve our webinars in the future. Just while we're answering questions, I thought I'd have that up for you guys. And then I do have 2 questions in the chat box.
Sure.
There is one. It's a bit specific, but I think it can be opened up for everybody. This person said that they only have one child that identifies as transgender or gay. They're asking how would you approach something like that? Would you just let them be and go through the program, or would you treat them in any special way?
If I'm gonna assume that this person, excuse me, this person is matched with a mentor, or they're in some kind of a group mentoring where they're part of they're part of a group of several young people who are being mentored by an adult. My question would be, how comfortable and confident are you in your mentor to create an atmosphere around that person that is open-minded, objective, and non-judgmental. And that goes so far as to, one of the things that we need to do is we need to not ignore epithets and hate speech. Some people think the thing to do is to ignore it and to shrug their shoulders, but that's not how you show support for somebody who is questioning or who is redefining themselves. The way you show support is to identify those comments and those words right away, and uh, 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 and reject them publicly. We know, here's a really good example of this is just in all the theories about relational aggression, which is a big fancy word for bullying in school, okay? One thing that we know that always works when a young person is a student is publicly being bullied in school, is for other students to simply stand up against the bully and say, stop, that's not cool. So if you have somebody who may be self-identifying, maybe somewhere on the gender spectrum, or their sexual identity is in question, or maybe they fully identify, but what they're questioning is whether or not it's cool. All right. Um, uh, Aside from a mentor just being open and accepting, You also have to be ready if anybody uses any names or any inappropriate language to address that immediately and to uh, 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 label it as unacceptable and correct misconceptions immediately. That's how you can help a young person in your program. And you said there was another question in the chat box?
Yes, somebody else asked, what is your experience with asexual and aromantic youth, and how would you suggest supporting them?
Well, I think that actually there's a lot of asexual and aromantic youth because I think everybody's uh, uh, in my parents' age, back in the 40s and 50s, they would refer to people as late bloomers, okay, which is kind of a comical way of saying that somebody's really not doesn't appear to be interested in boys or girls or in having some kind of a blossoming sex life of some kind when they're an adolescent. And adolescence, of course, is when all of that happens. We do live in a rather sexual society, and as human beings, we are all sexual beings. Not everybody is driven the same way. Some of us are just preoccupied. Some of us are maybe suppressing feelings and it comes off as being disinterested. And some people consciously don't want to be involved with other people. I think we just have to respect everybody's choice for what it is. Like I said earlier, we live in a heteronormative society. Unfortunately, all the standards are based on dating, mixed gender dating. When you look at school activity, it's all based on gender and gender identity and how people look. As many strides are being made to try to change that, it still exists in our minds. And also for all the hard work that we do with our programs and help being objective and being open-minded with our young people and trying to give them as much opportunity and show them as much of the world as possible and who they can be. Um, uh, we're still working against belief systems that may exist at home. And that's another challenge that we face. So I I feel like I got a little lost in that answer, but I hope that helped in some way to answer answer the question. Any other questions or thoughts, whether somebody wants to do it verbally or put it into the chat box, please, I welcome them.
So my name is Robert, and I'm calling from an LGBTQ youth organization. So my purpose for being on the call today is to kind of learn a little bit more about the intersection between mentoring and our population, because
Great.
we're actually searching for a partner to help us train mentors. So we have the language and the concepts and the population down, but we don't have the best mentoring skills down. So I guess I'm asking, is there a special way in which you apply, Mentor New York applies its mentoring abilities and skills and knowledge to the population?
Well, there are certain best practices that apply no matter what kind of a mentoring program you run. We refer to them as the elements of effective practice in mentoring. When you get your follow-up email today, and I'm so glad you were on the call, and I hope parts of this were not boring for you. But when you get your follow-up email, there are going to be links in that email to ways that you can get further personalized assistance, technical support and assistance, from us and other resources that are also available to you. So I don't need to tell you, I'm sure, about GLSEN or any of the other youth service organizations that work with this population. But the issue of mentoring and how mentoring can help, I hope this illustrated that having a supportive adult and a thinking partner for young people in general is wonderful. We focused on this population because we feel like this is a hidden population in many programs. And we wanted to make sure that people were being as inclusive as possible. In your situation where the program is specifically designed, and we do have some models of how that works, I mentioned True Colors in Connecticut, is a long-standing program that specifically mentors LGBTQQ youth. We're here to help anybody who's running any kind of a mentoring program, no matter who the population is. That's kind of a long answer to say that we're happy to help. There are certain best practices that all mentoring programs need to consider. The challenge with this population is in probably most often is in the screening, is enhancing your screening and training process for your mentors. One of the challenges, as you can probably imagine, that programs will face when mentors self-identify with the mentee in some way, there is a tendency to possibly over-project into the mentee's experience. Now, my experience when I was 16, 17, 18 years old was not necessarily a great experience and was far different than possibly what many young people today might be experiencing. If I were to empathize in the wrong way by overly projecting my own personal experiences and biases onto that young person, I might completely miss what's actually going on with them. Therefore, when we have people who can relate, like gay, lesbian, transgender adults mentoring young people in the community, part of our training and part of our screening process has to be to help people to understand how to manage their expectations and to understand how to keep their own experience and their own thoughts and feelings separated from their young people that they're working with, so that the young people can be themselves and not what we want them to be. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. We are in the process of linking to our local Western New York chapter, if you guys call yourselves chapters, in order to set up that relationship. And I was kind of like sneaking into today's meeting to kind of see how you're already incorporating and viewing the LGBTQ youth population.
Okay. So Jack Kavanaugh is the person, if you're not already talking to him, talk to Jack. And actually Andrew, who's on the call today, is in Western New York in that office as well. So you're in good hands.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And I really have to say that, you know, we've been around 36 years, and it's just now that as members of the LGBTQ community that we're kind of like guarding our youth, that we're finally saying, no, we need to reach out to other organizations to gain expertise in areas that we don't have it.
Okay,
so
well,
that's why.
I understand, you know, I have to tell you, I have actually been part of a number of failed attempts at starting mentoring initiatives to serve this population. So it's been very interesting. I always try to look at learning from where the failure came from and how it started out great and then collapsed. So here's an interesting point to bring out, which may or may not be true for either your program, or it may have to do with 5 years ago versus today. But often when nonprofits try to address the issue of mentoring LGBTQ youth, the question of liability comes up, and boards often squash the initiative because they're afraid, especially if they're not in a very urban, sophisticated environment like New York City or Los Angeles, or let's say Chicago, that they will be accused of recruiting.
Okay.
Or it doesn't, when you think about it, it sounds crazy from the point of view of the
Right.
program, but the reality is from outside of that program, the community at large will accuse them of recruiting. And therefore, a lot of time, boards who have done a very a strong and good job of building up their image in the community and protecting who they are and protecting their community members will shy away from this for that very reason. So part of this is education. Part of this is also why I put an emphasis on, just because you're serving people that you know in the community and young people who you can identify with, you still have to screen all your mentors thoroughly. You have to train them. You have to do background checks on them, because you have to prove to people, just like with any other mentoring program, that your young people are going to be safe, and that mentoring is going to be for the right reasons.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, you just nailed the whole process that we recently went through. And I'm the relatively new director coming in and looking at the program from the outside and not seeing any of these things in place, and kind of like wondering, oh my gosh, how could it have gone this long without having those very precise things put in place?
Right. Right. And for
So, like,
that reason, some programs are only site-based programs.
right. That makes sense.
Okay, Andrew, is there anything else coming through the chat box? Anybody else have any comments about this or anything else that I talked about? I am
Yeah,
an open book.
somebody asked a question, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. So they're saying that they're they're coming from a rural / conservative area, and they're wondering how to go about how to go about like navigating mentors, guardians, or mentees who state that they do not feel comfortable with having an LGBTQ member as a mentor or a mentee. They're asking, what is the most sensitive way to ask questions about identity during the intake and interview process?
Are you talking now? Are they? Does this sound like they're talking about mentors and recruiting mentors, or are they talking about young people who are?
I think they're talking about both ends of that. So having an LGBTQ mentor and an LGBTQ mentee.
Okay, so there's a couple of ways of handling that, and every program has to do what's comfortable for them. I try to shy away from being overly directive, even though I have a lot of opinions about these things. Okay. I'll give you, let me answer that by giving you an example or telling you a short story. I ran a program. The children in the program that I ran were all living with HIV and AIDS. They were anywhere from 7 years old up to 17, 18 years old. And it was a mentoring program, one-on-one, community-based mentoring, which meant just like with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, they were matched one-on-one. They went off on their own out into the community a couple of times a month and spent the day together. And mentors picked young people up at their homes and brought them back at the end of the day. Now, because of the population that I served, I probably had about 40% of the people who volunteered to mentor in the program self-identified as gay or lesbian, because they felt that they understood this population and wanted to work with young people. Many of the people had come to the program having already had friends that were ill or who died, and they now wanted to do something with a young person who really sort of had their whole future ahead of them, which was very true. I had a policy. My policy was you did not have to tell me how you identified. It was a question that was optional on the application. You also did not have to tell me whether you were positive or not. It was a question that was totally optional, and I did not judge anybody if they didn't answer the question. I also had guidelines and a policy that we gave out to parents and guardians of children who were registered with the program. And that policy included the fact that we did not make matches with volunteers based on sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, color, or anything, or age. That the only way we made matches was based on gender and gender alone. Men or people who identified as being male were matched with boys, and women or people who identified as being women were matched with girls, period, the end. And if this was a problem for any families, they were free to opt out of the program because there were other mentoring initiatives that they could apply to. I never had a volunteer rejected. And I always left disclosing who they were to the volunteer. I never felt it was my place to disclose. So I would tell volunteers, if it comes up, it's in your hands how you want to talk about it, how you want to deal with it if it comes up. I think it came up, as if I can recall, over 8 years, and close to 60 or 70 volunteers that I was working with over those 8 years. I think that question came up maybe 2 or 3 times at the most, and I never had a volunteer rejected. Now, on the other hand, years ago, Big Brothers Big Sisters New York used to ask that question on their applications. Not only were you positive, but did you self-identify as gay or lesbian? You were required to answer the question. They also had a policy that said they reserved the right to disclose this information to families when matches were being made. And if a family was not comfortable with that, then they would move you on and match you with somebody else. Because of that policy, they had a small handful of like 6 to 8 volunteers that never got matched with anybody. So I'm hoping that in some way that story answers your question. When we leave it, when we put our policy out there that says we are all inclusive and this is what all inclusive means and how we make matches, and we leave it to families, anybody can walk away from the program. And that goes for the mentees we allow in our program, and that goes for the volunteers that we allow in our program. And we leave it up to every individual to self-identify and disclose whatever information they are comfortable with, because it is their story and not the program manager's story. It tends to not be an issue, and it tends to not be a problem. When we start to make it an issue or a problem, when we give people a shopping list of choices, then it starts to become a problem. So I think attitude, how we come at it to begin with, is really, really important. And that's why having policy in place that's concrete, having a statement of inclusion that's very concrete, that is available to everybody. If that's where your agency is coming from, if you're comfortable and you can do that, you may lose a few people, but you also may gain some new people that never felt like they were going to be included in your program. And I think that that's a really important thing to consider. It's not just who you're going to lose, but who are you going to gain because you've made this statement of inclusion. I hope that that answered your question, or at least helped you think through it better. Anything else anybody wants to bring up, or is there anything else coming through the chat box? Andrew?
All right, Bruce.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody asked if you know the success rate in mentoring LGBTQ youth. I would suggest to email you in a follow-up
Yeah.
if you agree on that, just so you can find those numbers.
I don't know that there actually are numbers. I'm going to stick my neck out on this one, okay? But I think I'm probably right. I don't think it's any different than population of young people at large, meaning their non-gay peers. I think it's probably the same. Success rate in mentoring very much is about how a program is structured and the kind of support and supervision that mentors and matches get. What kind of coaching mentors are getting to support them, because long-lasting matches, which we have many programs have great history with, are very much dependent on the kind of support that mentors get. The more training we give them, the more support we give mentors, the more we become thinking partners to the mentors themselves, the better they are at mentoring, the better chance that the matches are going to last long. It doesn't matter who the young person is in the match or who the mentor is. So if we screen our volunteers properly and thoroughly, we give them good, solid education, good training before they get matched. We're thoughtful about who we match with whom, and we give them all the support that they need during the match. You're going to get, in general, a better outcomes than programs where they really say, okay, we've given you the tools, call us if you have a problem. Anything else? Anything else coming through, Andrew? And then we're going to wrap it up because we're at the half-hour point, but I'm happy if there's another question coming, or people now have my email address. If you're in Western New York, you have Jack Kavanaugh's address. We said the follow-up email is not only going to include the deck to today's training, it's also going to include some handouts and some resources for you, both for helping you in developing mentoring initiatives and to help support youth in your program.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that, that email will probably be out either today or tomorrow. It depends on when I get the chance to send that out. And we'll also be sending out certificates for this webinar, and those you'll be getting tomorrow. I'll be sending those out, so you could probably expect them by the end of the day tomorrow. I do have to say we need to wrap up just because we have a webinar coming on soon. So thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Andrew, for your help today. Thank you all for the great questions. And I wish everybody the best of luck. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully I'll see you or speak with you all again soon.
Have a great day, everybody.